Welcome, big welcome. We are happy to have you join our little family of friends on this table to just discuss this topic of coping with loneliness. So we had a session 2 weeks ago that I'll do a brief summary of what happened the last time for those who weren't here, and for those who were here, it's just going to help refresh you. But before I do that and introduce the speakers today, I'll then please just hand over first to my brother Sydney, who's going to say a prayer for us. Sydney, if I can please just ask you to show yourself, reveal yourself to all of us, and to please just say a prayer for us. Thanks so much, my brother.
Wow, thank you, brothers and sisters. Thank you, Zetu, for the invite for me to pray in that regard. Let me just pray before we start with everything. Let's pray. Thank you, Father, for your love, your kindness, your mercy. Thank you, God, for allowing us to get our meet here online, my Father, just to help each other, my Father, with loneliness, my Father, and all the things that we may be with all the discussion that you will be having, and also just to the test was speaking about the recap of last 2 weeks discussion, my Father. We pray that God, you will guide us, will be with the speakers, will be with everyone who's here, will be able to learn, my Father, and able to cope under the circumstances that we are faced at the moment, God. Pray and invite you, my Father, to be with us. In your Son's name, Jesus Christ, I pray of this. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Sydney. And welcome again. I see a few more people have joined or turned on their videos, perhaps. So welcome again. My name is Zetu. I am in the East region of the Johannesburg Church of Christ. And the speakers that we have for this awesome workshop, which is coping with loneliness, is Raj and Angie from the Pretoria region. I think they did a great introduction of who they were last week. Perhaps for those who are new this week, they'll just do a short little, summarized version of last week's one, just about who they are. But I will say that they come from two different perspectives, although it comes together in a very harmonious way. So I think, as we all know, that the topic that we are talking about today in this workshop is coping with loneliness. And so how this workshop or workshop is, it is a table of friends, and we are here. It's a very small group, as you can see, and I think that this is really what it's supposed to be, that we are supposed to be vulnerable, just chat about the things that are in our hearts, chat about how this topic has affected us, and to ask questions. I think the biggest thing about this workshop is there's going to be a Q&A segment towards the end, where you can just voice out any of the things that you faced or any types of loneliness that you felt, and to just voice out your own experiences so that we can share and direct questions to Raj and Ange. So Ange is a professional psychologist, and so she was giving us a perspective from a psychological view last week about, or rather 2 weeks ago, about what is loneliness. And I think that is what the first episode of this series was about, to just try and define loneliness, to understand what exactly is it, and to really get a gripping of the fact that it's not just this one size fits all definition. It's not like this is loneliness, and if you are lonely, this is what you are going to look like. Because it varies, and that's what we learned last time, that there's not just one type of loneliness. There are various types that you could deal with, and there is no one definition for it. So what we also did 2 weeks ago is we did a survey. So there was a survey that was conducted. Raj and Angie facilitated that for us, where there were various questions that we had asked to just try and find out a bit more about the different types of loneliness that we could have, and then the results of that was then what was going to be unpacked. So, sorry, was somebody speaking? Okay, I will then just continue. So part of what today's session is then going to be about is going further into that survey. So I think perhaps for now, let me hand over to Raj and Angie for them to just do a brief introduction for the new members of this family table, just for you to understand fully who they are. And then they will start with the discussion for the day and give us a result of the survey that was done last time, unpack that, and then go into today's lesson. And then I will come in towards the end to just facilitate any questions that you may have. So as they are speaking, please just write down and jot down any notes that you may have, so that towards the end, we can then facilitate a Q&A. So thank you so much. And over to you, Raj and Angie. We are so thankful that you are here to help us yet again to unpack this subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Zaitu, and welcome everyone taking the time to join us today, and it's really been great. I'll briefly introduce myself, and then Angie will introduce herself, and then we'll do the results of the survey and so on. As Zaitu mentioned, my name is Raj, and I have the privilege of serving in the full-time ministry. As Zaitu did mention, Angie comes from a clinical psychology perspective. I come from a biblical perspective. I've been doing ministry, full-time ministry for over 10 years, and then also been appointed a Bible teacher in our family of churches. And so I come from that perspective, and there's a great harmony, as Zaitu said, in how the Bible fits well with psychology, and honestly, generally the Bible is ahead of it, and psychology just catches up to it, type thing. But it's a very wonderful combination. But also, this is a personal topic for me. I definitely, I'm very much more emotionally connected to this topic because of my own experiences with loneliness, and Angie's can actually go through different types of loneliness, and as she was going through it, I probably related to all of them, which tells you it's very near and dear to me. And how can we help one another? How can we be a family? Oops, sorry about that. How can we be a community that can help one another and support each other through this pandemic, which really heightens and amplifies the struggle of loneliness? And so with that, I'm just going to pass it over to my wife, Angie.
Okay, so did I have to do another introduction?
Maybe briefly, if you think it might help people who've just joined us.
Very brief, because I really want to jump into the topic, okay, I practice as a clinical psychologist, and I volunteer my services in the full-time ministry here in Tshwane, and so have the privilege of working alongside the campus and the impact ministry. And we've renamed, the singles ministry here have renamed themselves in terms of not using the word single anymore, but using the word impact, which I think is a really helpful way in even addressing the idea of loneliness, that it need not be single and alone, yet it can be single and have impact in the world. So that's what I love about what they have brought here. So so can we jump into what we found in the survey from the previous week?
Yeah, hopefully.
Yes, please.
Hopefully you can see a screen that has the survey results from last week. And for those who have joined us and haven't done the survey, we actually have a survey that you can fill out, and I'll send the link in the chat box. You can do it at your own time and then send the survey results to us. It's anonymous. The only detail that is asked is the region that you're part of, like the church region. But there's an option for others. If you're not part of our church, that's fine too. You can just say other and carry on and still fill out the survey. And there's some additional comments at the end. So if you have any questions, or if you want us to connect with you, that would be a space you can use. So I'll send that Google link towards the end of this talk shop.
And so that survey really highlighted that we've all experienced loneliness on some level or another. What it does leave in terms of anonymity is it the same person highlighting the same severity of loneliness, which was very difficult to unpack in terms of the survey, which would have been quite helpful. So what I love about this particular group is that everyone understands that feeling of loneliness. The survey highly, clarified that in terms of, you see a lot of people in the field of sometimes. And so sometimes or often, when you have, those two highlights help me to understand, wait a minute, those are pretty high. If we have to do a scoring on all of these, that's pretty high in terms of the level of loneliness people experience within our community, which is something that really is important to address. And so what I thought to unpack a little bit further today is in terms of, yes, there's the definition of loneliness from the previous week. And if you're wondering about that, you can go and watch the previous video. But today I'll mostly be focusing on, well, there's actually different types of loneliness. And it's important to understand that, because if you know what kind of lonely you're experiencing, then eventually you'll know, okay, what are the things I can do, or the tools I can utilize in terms of coping with that loneliness. And so that's why it really is important that we talk about that today. So anyway, so let me go into Rain had messed up all my notes. So I have all my notes all mixed up. So I'm like trying to figure out, where are my notes for today, and where are my other supervision notes, and where are my other, it's all crazy. But anyway, let's start with, that there's a state of loneliness. So for example, it's your immediate feeling of loneliness. It may not have a historical reference, but it's that feeling of loneliness that everyone knows. Loneliness is a feeling that we all have. It's part of like anger. We know how that feels like. Joy, happiness, excitement, sadness, envy, jealousy. Those feelings is part of our repertoire of our emotional experience of the world. So having the feeling of loneliness is not necessarily something that is a bad thing altogether. It usually is lonely. It falls under what I would call the difficult feelings. I know some people say, oh, it's a negative feeling. And I'm like, well, that makes it really, it really does the emotion a disservice, because I say difficult instead of negative, because it is difficult. And no one wants to ever feel sad or lonely or envious or angry, because those are difficult emotions. Yet, where was I going with that, Raj? I suddenly lost my train of thought.
It's just basically
the repertoire of
the trait,
yes,
the state of emotion. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
And we all have it.
Yes, that's right. So see, this is the space we're in. It's more like a talk shop idea, and if anyone has something to say in between while we're talking, raise a hand, and we can, Zeta will notice, and she will be able to interject in that moment, because otherwise I'm just going to continue on with all the different types of loneliness.
And if I can just add, I think that's so important, because I know I for sure for long chunks of my life felt like I cannot say I'm lonely. It was a negative emotion, and it was unacceptable to say it, because that to me meant I was not being grateful or what have you. And so I try to bury it. So I appreciate you bringing that point, that it is something we experience as human beings, and it's just what it is.
Yeah. So that's in terms of the state of loneliness. And so there's actually trait loneliness as well. And so basically it's the constant experience of loneliness. What I say about this, you as an individual have experienced loneliness as far back as you can remember. And usually I will find examples like, if it's a trait loneliness, when you look back in your childhood, it's almost as though you're the third person, like you're looking at your life, but you didn't kind of live your life. That's usually something where I realize, wait, it's more of a trait loneliness. Or you've had to separate yourself from yourself. And that helps me to also then see, usually when you have trait loneliness, then in your early childhood, you most likely experience neglect or abuse. And so, it's interesting because sometimes I say to people, I think you've been neglected. And it would be like, no, I haven't been neglected. How have I been neglected? I've had food in my stomach. I've had a roof over my head. I've had clothes to wear. I've gone to school. There's so many reasons why it's not neglect. But then eventually, I usually clarify and I say, well, most likely emotional neglect. So if you can think about your childhood and you can see who was there for you when you were a child, who looks after you? Can you locate someone when you were sad that you could go to? Or even someone notice you, notice that you were sad, notice that you were in that corner, or anyone when you were a child that you felt like you could run to because you had a rough day at school and someone bullied you, for example. If you cannot locate that memory, then you would eventually develop a trait loneliness because you have not had the experience of another person who has been able to turn to you and say, I see you. I see you, I hear you, and how can I be of a support to you?
Yeah, and I think I want to just speak to this because it's so interesting. Again, in my lifetime, I'm 45, and over my time, I would say it's only probably the last 5, 6 years, and certainly still evolving, that I start recognizing emotion as a need. Even today, when Angie was describing these 4 states, I certainly identified with trait loneliness. And so when Angie said, well, she said what she shared about being, about being neglected. I'm like, I wasn't neglected. I had a great childhood. My parents were very supportive and so on, and physically, provided for me physically. But then she said, what about emotions? And then it's sort of, I realized, wait, emotions also matter. And so that's how I'm wired, in the sense that I don't think emotional needs at all it doesn't even show up on my radar till I'm intentionally thinking about it and realizing, oh wait, emotions do matter, and they actually do impact and affect the way I process the world around me. So I thought that was fascinating, how even now I'm having to be reminded that emotions are just as important as, if not more, physical needs.
And so, because loneliness is within the repertoire of emotions, then you need to look at, like, has that emotional need been met or been seen to and being validated, and that becomes important, because there's also the situational loneliness, which is the next I guess subheading under loneliness, where it's, because situational loneliness could be exactly that, where you find yourself and it's usually in a transitionary state. For example, you're the only one in your friendship group that is not married, for example, and then it becomes, oh, you're going to someone else's, now they're having babies and children, for example, and you're still not, you're still not dating. That situation that you find yourself in can make you also then experience loneliness. And or like when your children are leaving home, that also is that situational loneliness, where that situation that has arisen has brought on that feeling of loneliness. Or when you have that, even in the pandemic, actually, is a situational loneliness, because we're suddenly told to self-isolate, and we're told to all, we can't use our usual coping mechanisms when we feel lonely to be able to connect with others. Because usually then, if you're feeling lonely, what do? Go over to your friend's house and have a cup of coffee, for example. Or there's something you feel like you can do, but then suddenly the tools that you had have been taken away from you, and it's illegal. It's like, especially when we were all like forced in, this time last year, we were then suddenly trying to figure out Zoom and all sorts of things. Sorry, we have some very happy car person in the background, but anyway, so that totally distracted me now.
Well, I'd speak to that. We met a few days back with a few of our campus students, and we're social distancing. We're in a public park, and we're standing in a circle, and we haven't physically seen each other. We've seen each other over Zoom and so on. And we didn't know what to do. Like, how do we greet someone in a physical space? And I'm sure we all experienced it. You can't shake hands. So it's so not natural to stick your hand out to shake hands. You can't. Or give hugs. Now you have to do this sort of weird elbow thing, and it's like, but even the elbow, you have to do, have to move as though you're giving a hug, but you put your elbow out. So it's an awkward sort of thing of, you think the person's giving a hug, but they're actually sticking out the elbow, and you might put your arm around, and you feel like, oh, that's a bit of a socially awkward thing. But also, I struggle a lot with masks. I just can't recognize a person's face when they have their mask on. And so I actually get very insecure when I go outside, and I don't like it at all. The feeling of being embarrassed because I'm greeting someone thinking that they're my friend that I know, but they're actually a stranger because I can't tell anymore. And, I don't know if you feel that. And so when I look at situational loneliness, it's like there's a whole lot of things that fit into that category. And the pandemic just enhances things we never had to think about. Now we do have to, and the situation now starts to become almost like a permanence, because you don't know when the situation will change. So I wonder if that too adds to that experience of loneliness.
Yeah, absolutely. Because with the situational loneliness, it can link into now a chronic loneliness, where that state of being alone because of your situation then leads to a general dissatisfaction. And they say that a chronic loneliness it's considered chronic when you've been in that situation for going on 2 years. So then I'm thinking, oh my goodness, because now with this pandemic, it's probably going to lead into a chronic loneliness that people feel. And now that's going to be something we're going to be facing the upcoming wave, because when we connect with one another again, it's almost as if we're going to have to relearn some social skills. Like, how do we start a conversation? You suddenly feel awkward or very seen, or now it's the whole body experience, and you already feel lonely. And when you start feeling lonely, sometimes you tend to withdraw, and you feel othered already. It's interesting you're talking about the masks, Raj. Some people actually were happy about the masks, interestingly enough, because like I see clients from all religions, and with the Islamic faith, you got to cover up. So it's interesting how some people felt like, actually it's so nice to have everyone covered up, because then I don't feel like this odd one out anymore. And it really helped me to see, wow, how lonely it is when you've got a visible barrier between you and the other person, and you can't connect because of this covering. And so but for this person or these people, individuals, or these groups of people, it actually brings comfort.
Yeah, I mean, speaking to that, there's someone who had jaw surgery, and they had the entire jaw removed. So obviously, before the pandemic, the person would go to grocery store, for example, people saw their face, because their face is disfigured now, and so that person felt very self-conscious, as you would imagine, and lonely and afraid, and just was dreading to even go to the grocery store. But now, because of the mask, that person is so encouraged, because now people look at that person's eyes. And so just that small gesture of being seen, and making eye contact rather than staring at their jaw, it has really transformed their experience of living. So even though it's a pandemic and so many horrible things are happening, this person is like, wow, I'm so glad at least I'm seen. People see me look me in my eyes when I go to the grocery store or go outside, and they don't always stare at my jaw that's missing. So it's fascinating. I think this speaks to the human experience of of loneliness, of what it is that we all go through in different ways. And when we hear the story, we're able to, at some level, connect and be able to recognize ourselves in that human story. But it's such a human story.
Yeah. So I wanted to pause here at this point in time before Raj delves into, just some biblical perspectives on the different types of loneliness that I just spoke about. So, over to you, Zetu.
All right, no, thank you so much, Angie and Raj, for that. I think Ange definitely been a lot for me to just take in as well. I think knowing that there were more than one type, but actually listening to you unpack it all, I think it's very, very educational and helped me put things into context. So I think I can open it to the floor at this time to find out if anybody has any questions that they'd like to pose to Angie at this time before Raj then continues with his segment. I think I have a question maybe before other people come in. And in my mind now, I'm just trying to understand between the trait loneliness and the chronic loneliness, because I think it's both more lingering and it's not a situational thing. So just from a dealing with that type of a person perspective. So if I have two people and one person is dealing with chronic and the other is dealing with traits, do I approach it in different ways? Because I would presume that if you have a situational loneliness, we can find ways to perhaps work around the situation, which I'm sure you will tell us maybe next week's segment in terms of how do we then combat that, but not to jump the gun. So just from an understanding perspective, would the solution sort of be the same? Would I treat those people in a similar type of way if I have chronic or if I have traits, or is it still, although it would look similar because it's been lingering for a while, or no, completely not? I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it does make a lot of sense. And, thank you for that question. Because usually when you come across trait and chronic loneliness, the feeling is the same. It's that constant feeling of loneliness. Doesn't matter which situation, where you are, you eventually just feel that loneliness, as if no one in this world actually can understand what I'm going through, or what I'm going through. And so actually both trait and chronic loneliness are the ones that I watch out for, because that is usually what leads to a depression. And so because then everything, because once you start feeling it on a consistent level, depression follows very closely behind. But it's a terrible feeling, and it feels like you're the bane of society at this point. And so especially when I think about, okay, what's the difference between trait and chronic? Trait, I usually find childhood. I usually go back, and there's definitely childhood trauma on some level or another. Some people might not even recognize that it was trauma, but it was like, but there was no trauma. There was nothing traumatic that happened. But trauma can actually, that's what I spoke about in the previous video, just about, that experiment on the monkeys and what that can do when you're isolated. That in itself is quite traumatic. And when there's an absence of care, even though you of nurturance, genuine nurturance. So that's what I specifically look for in terms of the traits of loneliness. That part is very difficult to resolve. For some individuals may have experienced a loneliness that was pre-verbal. So when I say pre-verbal, is when before you have words to tell others or understand for themselves what was going on, they were already experiencing loneliness. Like, for example, we don't know if this baby was left in the crib hours on end with no one there. How would that baby ever be able to describe that loneliness? But there is this lingering sense of knowing that there was no one there, and you can't ever shake it away. that is a definite trait loneliness. And so, because they could never tell anyone, it was pre-verbal, even if they had no skill to do so. So there is an emotional memory that has no words. So how do you tell the other person, I feel lonely? Sometimes there's some people who keep saying, I feel lonely, I feel lonely. You ask them, what's making you feel lonely? There's a deer in the headlights. I don't know, but I do have it. And for that person, I usually recommend, I really do think therapy will be helpful for you. I really do think this is the point that you go see a psychologist. Chronic loneliness as well, where I noticed that when the last 2 years it's been so severe, you've had maybe someone significant pass away, then your child leaves, and then you've been sick and you've been alone and in this pandemic and no one knew you were ill, and it's literal pile upon pile upon pile. Then that chronic loneliness, then I usually say, I think you need support. It's important that you get, professional help to talk, to work through this with you, because when you speak to your friend or your family, and they're absolutely lovely and they'll try and support you, it's just not the same. So you actually need someone who can actually listen to and hear what you're saying and try and unpack it for you and move alongside with you. In that process, you'll find that your sense of loneliness will start alleviating. You don't know how it works, but it just does. And so if you do feel like you fall into any of those, I do recommend, actually, I think maybe it's time you consider going to see a psychologist. I specifically say psychologist because usually close behind is depression. And so psychologists are generally the ones trained in knowing how do you resolve a depression within someone. So that, and then if need be, a psychiatrist as well, but sometimes your depression is actually quite severe and you would need medication as well to be able to support you through that. And once you can work through the therapeutic process, you'll find that most likely then you can, decrease your dosage and eventually come off your medication. Yeah, so that's my 2 cents in regards to your question, Zetu.
No, thank you so much, Angie. More knowledge dropped in that answer all on its own. So thank you so much for that. It blows my mind that even as a child, when you can't even verbalize what you're going through, it somehow still remains on your brain and it lingers and it carries you through. So definitely enlightening to know that you could have trait loneliness that predates you being even able to remember it. So yeah, thank you, Angie. And I don't see any hands up at the moment. Maybe people are still digesting all of this information because it's definitely quite a bit. So perhaps if Raj would like to maybe come in and let us know just from a biblical perspective. I think from a clinical psychological perspective, we now are much more wiser in terms of information. And I hope that all of us were able to try and place ourselves or place people in our lives into the 4 different categories that Angie has been able to give us. And maybe as we're just still trying to mull over those as Raj is speaking, we then can combine and have questions towards the end. So I think because we have limited time, Raj, can you please enlighten us and let us know just from your perspective what you have for us as we continue digesting all of this information. Thank you, Raj.
Yeah, thank you, Zaita, and thank you, Angie. This is such a human experience, and just even reading our Bibles, for example, thinking about characters, for example, Mary, in Jesus's mother. If you think about her emotional state as a young woman, she probably would have been 14, maybe younger, when she's engaged to be married, and now she's pregnant. And imagine her emotional state and her loneliness when the whole village looks at her and they basically, there's only one way you can get pregnant, right? I mean, that's just the way it is. And And so they see her as an adulteress and having to carry that shame, carry that loneliness, and having to deal with that. And then even if you again think of Jesus now, he's born, and he's playing with the other kids, and there's a pretty good chance that people are asking him, "Hey, who's your real dad?" Like, I mean, we don't think about that when we read the Bible, but imagine this young boy experiencing that, and it's like the loneliness that brings about. And then think about John 6, where it's the Samaritan woman in John 4. Now read through the John 4, and now think about Jesus sitting with this woman. Usually we don't think of it as connected with his own life and his own mom and his own experiences. But now imagine her loneliness, and he's sitting with her. He has experienced this. He has experienced it and he has seen it in his own mom. And now he's sitting across this woman who's now an adulteress. So this is such it just brings the Bible alive to know that God understands loneliness, and he gets it. He gets it. And it creates, it opens a space for us to actually deal with our humanness. And so I want to share two scriptures really. And Proverbs 20 verse 5, the purpose of a person's heart are deep waters, but the one who has insight draws them out. This is what this is speaking to, is a person's heart. And in the Hebrew worldview, the heart wasn't just an organ, wasn't just associated with emotion, but was really the seat of a person's will. It's basically the innermost being. It's who you are, and they saw the heart as the gut. It was somewhere here. And so it is that. And as even Angie's describing these four states, or the four types of loneliness, how would we know? And that brings us to James 1 verse 19. My brothers and sisters, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. Quick to listen, slow to speak. For chunks of my life, I used to try to problem solve when people would share their thoughts with me, or their feelings, emotions, experiences. And by the grace of God, and thanks to certainly my wife helping me, and then others too have helped me along the way, I do it less, but I have to resist the temptation. And I don't know if this is a guy thing or what, I don't know if women also have that sense of fixing, but my point is, when someone speaks, it's easy to want to fix their loneliness. And both these scriptures teach me to really resist that that urge, but rather go swimming. Purposes of a person's heart, deep waters. Let me go swimming. And we will talk more about this in the third session. But I know that we all want to take some practical takeaway in every lesson. And so we're going to talk about lev listening in the last session on April 11th. And the word lev, I love the word lev. It's the Hebrew word for heart. Again, they didn't see heart as just emotion or an organ. And they didn't split the head, heart, hands, and they integrated. The heart was really all encompassing: emotions, intellect, desire, all of it, right? And so lev listening, how do we listen to a person's heart? That's what Proverbs 20 verse 5 is saying. And that brings up this James 1:19, quick to listen, slow to speak, understanding, but not just understanding intellectually, but connecting with the emotion and allowing a person to speak the emotion, and even exploring that. How are you feeling? And allowing that feeling to linger. And sometimes it's unspoken, right? It's so lonely. I can't put it in words, like Genji was saying, with the experience in the cradle. But that requires a lot of emotional, a lot of empathy. Requires just sitting with someone and being there, and being very, very quick to listen. And you're listening to, at this point, an echo. You're not even listening to words, you're listening to an echo. But it's that urge to fix that echo or to fix that situation, and instead to actually just deep breath and to be able to hear a echo of what could be possibly not even spoken. So I know we'll talk more about practicals, but what I do want us to ponder is this is a spiritual reality. This is not just, oh, we need to talk about emotion. This is spirituality. This is healthy, emotionally healthy spirituality. And this is in the Bible, listening to the Lev, being quick to listen, slow to speak. It's characters in the Bible, including Jesus, experiencing loneliness and again connecting with his journey of being, in effect, an illegitimate son. That's what he was. They knew that Joseph wasn't his dad. And so looking at human experience of our King and Savior, and embracing that and navigating that together. And it's not a cookie cutter approach. It's not a formula, which as an engineer, I would love to have a formula, but it really is that vital. And what it does, and when we pursue this, is it draws us closer to God, to each other. It helps us to become more and more fully human.
Yeah. Sorry, Zaitu.
No, nothing, Angie. Please do continue.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you shared about that scripture, and also I love the Bible where even in the Proverbs it talks about that no one else can share the joy that you have in your heart. It's in Proverbs 14 verse 10. Each heart knows its own bitterness, and no one else can share its joy. And each heart also knows its own loneliness, its own grief. Because I know that bitterness is, what version is that? NIV. Okay. That there's experiences that you have in your life that will always make you feel lonely, because it was a very lonely moment. I don't know how else to describe it. And I wish that I could say to you, this is the solution to that moment. There isn't, because lonely, it's lonely. And how do you resolve lonely? It is one of your emotions. And so that's why there are moments in your life that you have had that you will have to, unfortunately, only know yourself, because you were there, you were present in yourself in that particular moment. Usually there's such unique moments. And when people, what one can do, I know that's the next step though, but as I'm talking about it, that's the moments of listening, where it's amazing what listening can do in terms of the other person may not understand, ever cannot actually, yet you're trying. It's that moment of meeting where, okay, I can visualize and I can imagine that moment. It's these traumatic little moments. Sometimes I call them macro trauma, and there's also micro traumas. That's a topic for another day. But those little micro traumas can also bring in those moments of loneliness that no one else can carry. But also the other part of it, the joy that no one else can share in, because you know what you have been delivered from.
Amen.
That moments where that God moments of picking you up. And then I think about Mary at the cross, where that no one knows. Wow, she's looking up at her son on the cross, and that moment where Jesus looks at her and sees her loneliness and helps her out. I think is a beautiful God sees her moment. There are moments that only God can see, and those are the times I usually pray, okay, God, no human being can. They don't have the capacity to. But you can, God. You see. You're all powerful. You're all knowing. And so if you are all knowing, you know this moment with this person. And may you step in and support. Can you step in? And this is the moment of prayer. You step in and help this person bear that moment and that experience of loneliness.
Sure. No, thank you very much, Angie and Raj. I think I'm definitely blown away by today's session. I think the introduction was great, a way to start, and now I think we're getting to the real meat and flesh of what loneliness is about, and empowering ourselves with so much more. I think, Raj, when you're sharing about the scripture in Proverbs, that a person of it's like it's deep waters, and that a person of understanding will be able to draw them out. And I think what Angie was saying about asking the questions as well, you wouldn't have known that you have trait loneliness if it's something that happened before you could speak. But if you ask the right questions, and as we're being empowered, we understand a bit more, and we can ask the right questions to draw people out. But also, Raj, I think what you've shared also is the fact that God is the one that actually helps you out. So for us, it's more to listen. And I think, I don't know, for me, it brings a whole lot of calmness to say, even in myself, when I face loneliness, or even in other people that I care about, that I love about, it is an extremely personal journey. That Jesus is the one that you look to be able to, once you've identified what you have, once you have people in your life, whether it's psychological help or people in your life who help draw some of those things out, ultimately, Jesus is also the one that helps to seal everything. I hope my understanding, Raj, is not misquoting you there, but at least that's what I took away from what you shared. And I don't, like I said, it's given me a great deal of comfort to say it's great to know that God really does have everything ultimately in his hands to be able to give us the solution. So I will then just hand it back to the floor. If anybody has any questions at this point, please do feel free to then throw those to Raj and Angie. We do have just a few minutes left of this talk shop, and point of it is so that we can all talk and have these conversations. So it would be great that if you do have any questions, please do share. But if not, that's also okay. So I'll then just throw it over to the floor for now. Thank you. Vuyo, I see your camera's on. I'm not too sure whether you wanted to also ask a question at this point.
I don't have a question. I think maybe a thought that I wanted to share, maybe kind of piggybacking from some of the comments I made like 2 weeks ago, about how if you're not in a healthy relationship, like a romantic relationship, like long term, it will affect you. And I brought up this whole thing of people in happy relationships age better. I think just to kind of maybe qualify that or add to that as well, I don't think that you have to be married to be in healthy relationships. I think God's kingdom.
Correct.
God's kingdom. I think the dream that Jesus has of, by this shall all men know that you are my disciples when you have love for one another,
Yeah.
And I think there's also scripture that says he sets the lonely in families, so God does see loneliness, and he does, bring us into relationships. And the way the kingdom's supposed to work is that we're supposed to love one another. So
Yep.
Loving relationships can also happen in the kingdom. And I thought I just wanted to add that, that if you're not married, that doesn't mean that you're doomed to have a miserable life.
Yes, I appreciate that
Yes.
so much. I love your contributions,
Yeah.
Vuyo. And so I really do think that I've known you over the years, and I appreciate your thoughts in any topic. And so you have so much to contribute as well. So, and I'm putting you on the spot there, but also as I think that, as if anyone has any questions, I think Vuyo is a great person to talk to as well. Over the year, yeah. I was thinking that last week, and I'm so glad you're speaking again, because I was like, this week I need to point that out, because this is what this platform is for.
Yes.
Identifying
100%.
people who have such a depth of thoughts and understanding and walking with the person. And you definitely one of those people, Huyon. So I'm saying this on this platform. So if anyone has questions, you can find out. And
thanks, Angie.
because
If there are any complaints, I want to send people to you. You're my this disclaimer. You're gonna sue people. You're gonna sue me for bad advice. Then
I don't think that would be the case, though. Usually, I would most likely, if I had to do something, someone walking away from you usually feels heard, and understood. And so,
thank you so much.
And so that's
I really appreciate the compliment. Thank you.
Okay, there's two people.
Yes, we see two questions.
Yes, I think Mashlodi's hand was up first, and then Sydney, you can go after Mashlodi. Thank you. You're on mute, Mashlodi. You're on mute.
Oh, okay,
Perfect.
sorry. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think when I came to the workshop last week, I was like, oh, I'm not sure if I am lonely, but I'm just gonna come. So today I said to one of the sisters, I said the same thing. I'm like, oh, there's a loneliness workshop and this so and so is doing it. And I don't know if I don't know if I'm lonely and I'm gonna go. And then she said, well, if you live alone, you're lonely. And I then but thanks, Angie, because then when you talked about all the different types of loneliness, then I was able to pick up, oh, you have trait loneliness. And just to also talk about, as you were talking about growing up as a child, can you actually identify a person or a moment where you could have your needs met and say, this is how was my day? And, that helps me to realize, or you have trait loneliness because of that. So I think it's just good. But then I'm just thinking of how many other people actually wouldn't come to something like this because it feels like, or maybe I'm not lonely. And I don't know, maybe are there ways that we learn to deal with loneliness, that it becomes okay and you don't even realize that you are lonely, because the fact that I literally came just because, oh, okay, the singles are doing this. Yeah, I guess, I'm single. Oh, yeah, I guess, I do want to get married. Maybe I am lonely. Yeah, it's just, but then I realized even at work that it's easy to be lonely as a disciple, not only because you're a disciple, but because already, because as, you're so different from everyone. You are excluded from a lot of conversations, not only conversations that are worldly, but also conversation of different people who are in different life stages. Other people talk about their husbands and their children, or they talk about, where they're going, and in that sense. So I'm not sure if I'm asking questions, but I guess, it's enlightening. Yeah.
Thank you for your question, Flody. I think it's really, I love your questions. And just, I'm glad that, okay, I'm getting distracted by it. Sorry, I'm sure you guys already know that I'm easily distracted by other sounds and then I lose my train of thought. Can we just...
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, so Claudia, first of all, I really appreciate that you always ask these thoughtful questions, and you're an explorer at heart, and how you're willing to try something new, and you don't even know if it really relates to you or not, but you're going to try it anyway. I think in terms of the coping up with loneliness, you definitely have already utilized some tools, which we will talk about next week. And so I'm sure you'll have a lot to contribute next week in terms of the input, and your voice would be, really valuable on this platform. And so the reason why then we record this is because sometimes some person might say, let me see what that loneliness thing is about. And hopefully they hear the recording and realize, oh my goodness, I think I am lonely. I thought I was just trying to push that feeling away, because remember, it is a difficult feeling. Who wants to carry a difficult feeling? We tend to push that feeling away and carry on with life. Yet that difficult feeling is actually telling you, hello, something in this house is not doing well, and we need some help in this area. And so it's not a bad or negative thing to have. It is a signal saying, okay, please address this, because if you continue on this way, it's not going to be helpful for us, body, heart, soul, physiologically. We spoke about in the previous session just about the physiological effects of loneliness and how detrimental it is to your well-being. So I appreciate you bringing that up and just saying, hey, there is this platform. There's so many people who may not know that they're lonely, but luckily there is this video then that now we can send through and say, hey, why don't you just take a quiz and see if it applies to you.
Yeah, and if I can just also add, I think also it becomes about a space that is open where this conversation can take place, that it's not off limits. Because I think sometimes, and this is just my opinion, being in the church 20 years, and even if you're not part of in the church, that's, you probably can still relate that sometimes there's some conversations that are just not polite in polite society type thing. I think loneliness is one of those, especially in a communal environment, whether it be office space, whether it be church space. The assumption is because there are other people around, you shouldn't feel lonely. And when you then look at other people and they seem to be having a good time, they all seem to be laughing, or they seem to be really, just doing well. The assumption is, oh, I must be the only one feeling a bit outside this group or feeling a bit lonely. I better just keep that to myself because I don't see anyone else even talking about it. But loneliness is an emotion, even if it's not chronic or even if it's not trait, it's a state. We feel it at different times. And there is a space for connection where the conversation can happen. And because you have joined this group, like Angie mentioned about Vuyo, or even yourself, Maklodi, you are, because you've gone through and you're mature and you're wise and you have so much to offer, that each of us can then open that space up, even by being vulnerable ourselves, and allowing for that conversation to take on its organic form, and then there's human connection being forged, and a permission almost being given that it's okay to speak about difficult emotions in this space. It's okay to not always be happy. It's okay to feel a bit outside of the group. That doesn't exclude you from the group. It's just part of that human experience we feel, which only, I think, strengthens us, and strengthens our connection with God. Like I said, there's a spiritual component to it, and it certainly connects us to others, and we feel, wow, I can speak about what is really going on, which translates to our friends coming to and saying, wow, I can also speak about what's happening. This is not a place where we just all have a surface level relationship.
I guess we had
one yes hand. And Sydney's hand was up too.
If you will please allow us, this is the last question. I know time, we are running over and some people may have to leave, but if you may please just indulge us to have Sydney ask his question and then we can close for the day. Thanks, Sydney.
Okay, thanks, guys. Thanks, Angie and Raj, for this teaching. I think it just makes me to realize that maybe there's a lot that maybe, especially on my side, that I was not taking into consideration, or maybe it could be loneliness or what. It's just the eye opener, especially when we're talking about the state of loneliness, which you mentioned that there are four of them. And of which somehow I'm just sitting here asking myself whether can those stage that whether I thought it's a trend stage or chronic stage. I can't tell exactly. But what I just need to know is, could it happen that what I was feeling as a young, at the early age, let me use the word, at the early age, whether this was it, the loneliness, can it affect my decision that I make at the moment when maybe I am a growing up person? I just need to know there.
That's a lovely question. Yes, it does. Because if you haven't had an experience of someone else there, do you tell anyone that there's a problem? No. You start learning that if I need to sort out something, I must do it myself because no one else is going to step in and help me. No one else is going to be available. So I might as well just go do it. And then you go quiet on the inside. Yet it's desperately lonely, because then the other person doesn't even know they should reach out, because it's interesting, lonely people are usually the ones that look the strongest.
Wow.
Yeah, it's because they just do. When someone else walks into the office, for example, I know one of the things I watch out for is they've had an incredibly lonely life, because there wasn't someone to step in and say, I see you, what's going on. They had to learn, no one's going to come. I'm already crying, I'm on the ground, you look around and no one noticed. So what do? You're like, well, let me just pick myself off, dust myself off, get the sand off, whatever. And you go home. And you don't even think to say, Mom, Dad, or grandma, or cousin, or sister, or brother, whoever you felt like was the person who could see you, and say, man, I just had a big fall. You go to your room as if nothing happened. And you carry on. It was severe. You might have even had to clean off blood and find, I don't know, something to sort yourself out. You probably put your clothes over so no one notices. And so this is the same pattern you're going to take on into adulthood. That you're always fine. It's usually, how are you doing? Fine. I'm good. Are you, I'm good. I'm fine. I'm okay, is usually the response. But yes, if I had to just dig a little bit deeper, I usually find, wait, but you did this alone. You were so sick, yet you drove yourself to hospital? Was there no one you could call? No, I didn't even think of it. And that's because you become so familiar with that feeling, you think it's pretty normal. And so then it's like, no, you should not be living this way. It is important someone take care of you, and it will feel foreign. You will say, don't baby me. It's okay. It's okay. It makes you feel vulnerable. And when you feel too vulnerable, we tend to push. We tend to say, no, stay away. Too close. You're too close. I need to push you away there. But yet it perpetuates that state. And so now you've just pushed the person away, but the person actually wants to step in, and then you still keep pushing away. And then eventually people leave, and then you're still lonely. Can you see that vicious circle that starts to happen? And so you want to stop that, so that it takes courage to allow someone to step into your vulnerability. Big courage, because you know what it feels like to have been neglected or abandoned or not heard or not seen. So it's a real brave moment. It takes lots of courage. And so this is the process of also, okay, let's see how we can have a different way of being with each other. And even as an adult, you're not meant to be alone like that. God doesn't want you to be alone like that. And so this is part of the platform of, okay, how can we at least take a few steps towards coping and perhaps even resolving some of that loneliness. Hope that helps you, Sydney. And thank you for that.
Yeah, it does. It does. Thanks a lot, Angie.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Sydney, and thanks, Rajan. And I think maybe before I get fired, I saw Irene that your physical hand was up. So this may be the last thing I do before I get dismissed from my duties. But Irene, I saw that you have a question. Please do ask that with the permission of Rajan and
yes.
And then that'll be it for today.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks, Irene. Thanks, Lena.
Thank you. Just a short one, Ange. Promise it's not a long one. When does being alone turn to loneliness?
Lovely question. Okay. Because we're wired for connection in terms of, because you could be alone, but you could be very connected and that you actually don't feel alone. You could be, there's someone you can call that's a phone call away. Loneliness and alone is when you're alone and you don't know who to call. And then you start wondering, would anyone even know if I had to die in my apartment today, would anyone come knocking on my door? Very real, honest question of, ooh, that's lonely. That's when you know, okay, I'm actually lonely, not alone and lonely, because that feeling of who's keeping me in mind, and if you can't locate someone keeping you in mind, it's a very lonely moment. And then that's when it starts becoming, you got to look at, is it situational, is it trait, is it chronic, and we start unpacking from there. So hopefully that answers your question.
And I'll add on to that also is the why. Again, it's the Proverbs 20 verse 5, the heart's deep waters. Why am I alone? Is it because I'm afraid of people? And I say that from personal experience, where I've been alone, and because I'm afraid of that connection. And more importantly, I'm actually afraid of the rejection. So the connection I seek, but the desire for connection is nowhere near the fear of rejection. And so I just stay in my room, and I lived that way for chunks of my, from almost 18 to 26. And if it hadn't been for people who reached out to me and studied the Bible, I would be living that way 100%, because that fear was so real and so scary. Oh, I feel emotional sharing, because I remember that memory, and I'd rather be in my room than face that. And it's only God's grace. I'm so grateful for Him sending people, and now I'm where I am, but I still recognize that fear, and I still have to deal with that fear, because I'm afraid of what people would do to me if I show myself to them. And it's real, and I have to fight it every day and talk about it. And that's where I've really appreciate vulnerabilities. I've had to talk about that fear. It doesn't go away. It's still there. I'm afraid my wife will not accept me, or my wife will leave, like she will die. It's a fear of abandonment. So all these fears they're still there, but I'm learning to speak about it. So I would say the why am I alone does contribute to that space where I might be alone but not lonely. And sometimes it is because I'm alone just because I need a minute. Like Angie said, I have a lot of connections, a lot of people, and God wired me to be, that's just the way I rest, introverted. I tend introverted, and I get recharged when I spend time alone. And so that's different from the why is because I fear, or because I'm worried that the connection is whatever, but that fear and the motivation, I think, definitely plays a key part in the difference between alone and lonely.
Thank you. That's great.
No, thank you very much, Raj and Ange, and thanks, Irene, for asking that question. I see Julia has posted on the group to say that true, I can relate to the fear of rejection. So I think it seems like today's session was very relatable to a lot of us, and whether it was just information that you could connect to or experiences that you could connect to, I just think it felt a whole lot more just relatable, like as Julia has succinctly put it. So I think before I encroach any further on your Sunday, I just want to thank you again, Raj and Ange, for doing these sessions, empowering us with these tools, letting us know so much about what is loneliness about. And I think just before closing out, Raj has linked on the chat box right here, the link to take the survey. So for people who were not here last week, or rather 2 weeks ago, and were not able to participate in the survey, please do the survey. You can just copy it and paste it to your private links if this will disappear, just so that you have it, so that out of the traits that Ange has provided us today, you can accurately place yourself, because this knowledge is the power that we need to be able to just navigate our way out of it. So I think, thank you so much for attending. Thank you for brilliant questions and just the vulnerable sharing that everybody has done. Much appreciated definitely on my side. And I think everybody who's here definitely appreciates it. So thanks, Raj and Angie. Thanks everybody for attending. We have the next session on the 11th of April.